I just want people to have access to these areas so they can see them, because I'm a true believer that if they can't see them, they won't value them and they won't want to protect them in the future.
Episode 1119, Caleb Burns returns, protecting your access to adventure.
You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
Hey friends, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast again. I have returning guest Caleb Burns with us today, and Caleb was on fairly recently at the end of July, episode number 1095, and at that time we were talking about the value of guiding, especially in the Cascades. We were talking about how guiding can really be beneficial to help people get into new sports and into the wilderness in a safe way and in an enjoyable way. But toward the end of that conversation, we touched on something that's near and dear to my heart and to Caleb's as well. And I invited Caleb to come back on the Adventure Sports Podcast so we could spend some time on this. We're going to talk about public land use, public access to public lands. We're going to talk about the ways that various legislation and ideas and environmentalist ideas and ecological protections, and there's so many things. We're going to talk about how that impacts the whole picture. But we're not here to talk about politics. And I'm just going to say that up front. We don't want to be political. Instead, we want to be informative and offer perspectives for you to consider. And I say it that way purposefully. You don't have to agree with anything we say or disagree with anything we say in this conversation. We just want to share the perspectives that we've had about this amazing treasure that we share, which are our public lands. So that's what this episode is going to be about, though we'll talk about adventure and fun too. But anyway, Caleb, welcome again to the Adventure Sports Podcast.
Thanks for having me again. I'm stoked to be here.
Yeah. You know, I realize, Caleb, you probably won't like this any more than I will, but I'm going to bring this up. You and I have something in common, sort of. Larry Linville, Frank Burns from MASH.
Ah, yeah, I remember MASH. I'm aging myself a little bit now.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old show now, but the reason I bring it up is because when Frank Burns, Larry Linville did such an amazing job portraying Frank Burns, but he was such an annoying character, and Larry Linville just knocked it out of the park. He was really, really good at it. But anytime people would ask me, oh, are you related to Larry Linville? And I would always thought Frank Burns, And here you are, Caleb Burns, so you probably had a little of that in your life too. I don't know, but...
No, not too many people from my generation watched MASH, I don't think, but I definitely was one of them.
I was a kid.
Yeah. No, I had grandparents and parents that were definitely into it, so I had to watch a little bit of that. And kind of on a funny note, in a past career, I actually met David Oxenshire as he was driving through, and I knew him from MASH, so it was just kind of funny
that you
bring that up, too.
Well, anyway, it's fun to start with a chuckle.
Yeah.
So we have such an amazing, amazing resource in the United States of America, which is our public lands. And I don't know if everyone fully appreciates how valuable this is. We have our National Forest. We have our Bureau of Land Management lands, BLM. We have the wilderness areas. We have our national park system. We have our state park system, systems across the 50 states. And I'm going to start this way, Caleb. When I've interviewed people, especially from Europe and the UK, they talk about going backpacking or bike packing, and then they talk about trying to find a place to sleep at night. And out of this came this understanding that they don't have the public land systems that we do. And often these people I've interviewed, they call it wild camping, but what they do is they wait until it gets dark, and then they throw all their gear behind a bush, and they set up a tent, and they get up before daylight and pack everything up and leave because they're trespassing. Because there are no public lands, well, very few. It's difficult. right?
Yeah.
And it might be called crown land or something like that. And I'm not an expert on any of that, but it just was a sharp contrast to where I live. I live in a county in Colorado where only 10% of the land is privately held. 90%, give or take, is public lands. And it happens to be one of the biggest counties in Colorado. I think it's the third largest. And that means that 90% of millions of acres, we're talking about just open access for the most part for people to go encounter nature in a variety of different ways. And it's such a valuable asset, and it's one of the reasons why I call where we live home, because it's here. And we could take that for granted so easily, but I think that we would be mistaken to do so. So you built a career out of taking people into these lands.
Yeah.
And will you just kind of give your overall feeling about the value of what we have in America?
Sure. I'll try and do it justice. I think you put it extremely well that it's really rare in the world to have such a system to where there's land that is owned by the people and it's for the people.
Yeah.
I'm going to start out kind of the same way that you did. And full disclosure, there are people out there that are much smarter on this topic than me. I do not have any desire to get into politics. That is why I'm a guide. Unfortunately, with that and accessing public lands, there is a political aspect to it, it seems like. But to try and sum up public lands and the importance, they are so incredibly crucial, I think, for humankind. For so many people, public lands or the wilderness area seems like it's so far away, and for a lot of us, yourself included, it's virtually at our doorstep, and we can take that for granted, for sure. I think that meeting those people that don't traditionally have this sort of system or have access to this, they see the value in it so much more than we do, just because it's not something that they have. I think that it's multifaceted in the value of it. You could look at it from a mental health perspective. If you're stressed, go take a hike. It's a great stress reliever. What do you do if there's nowhere to hike because it's all privatized?
Right.
That would be really unfortunate. If you want to go fish, look at public lakes. You can do that. Or if you want to go climb a mountain or go mountain biking, there's so many different aspects to it and so many different uses for it, and that's part of the beauty of it. I think for me as an outfitter or as a guide perspective, having those public lands available to us and having such a huge diversity of public lands is what allows our business, honestly, to function.
So we just took a break because we had a internet connection glitch, and so now we're back, and Caleb was in the middle of talking about the value of public lands, and we had to fight the computers for long enough that we don't know exactly where he was. But anyway, Caleb, continue on with that theme. You were talking about how important public lands are and what a valuable treasure they are for all of us.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying, having a computer problem, go take a hike.
Tell the computer to go take a hike.
I could definitely use a little bit of public lands right now after all this. No, I think that the value of public lands is, in a nutshell, far beyond what most people are aware because we have them. It takes not having them, or for people in other countries that don't have them, to really bring about the value that they have to us. You were talking about people that you've interviewed that having to pirate camp essentially because they don't have that. I think that we're really fortunate in the way that we have these, and so it's quite literally, as soon as we're done with this interview, I could go hop on public lands pretty easily. As you mentioned, you have them right outside your door essentially. when we have those things, I don't think that we always see the value in them. But, how many people listening to this podcast or listening online can look back at a time where maybe they were stressed or they just needed to get away and they utilized public lands in some way, whether that's to go fishing, mountain biking, hiking, go camping, backpacking. There's just so many different ways that we are able to utilize them.
Yes.
And I think that because we have them, we don't always see the value in them. I think they're crucial for people's mental health, for honestly society to really function in a civilized way. I think that it's an easy escape for people. And beyond that, in my profession, it also allows people to make a livelihood out of those lands that, I couldn't own all that land, nor would I want to. Beyond that, I think that it's really special in a number of ways that, I'm sure we'll get into in this conversation. But just for future generations, for just really for people emotionally, mentally, and borderline, I think, medically, to be able to get out there and explore them and have those available to them.
Yeah, I agree. And, there are always discussions about land use and caring for the environment and all of that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that the listeners need to agree with me on this, but I want to express my opinion on this because it matters to me. And it's something for people to consider. I'm not saying agree with me. I'm saying consider this perspective. Some people believe that humans are the problem, that we're like parasites on the planet and we're destroying it. And then that next step of that is, well, if humans are the problem, if we can keep humans out away from the natural areas that we have, then the planet can heal and humans, the problem's eliminated because humans are forced out of nature. I think that doesn't work long term. And the reason is because we're a part of nature, and it's our job to be stewards and caretakers of nature. And we can do that, but only if we know nature as a friend, maybe even as a nurturing mother. If we don't understand nature because we've never interacted with nature, then we have no context for what should be done or how to vote or what to care about or where to place resources to take care of the natural environments that we celebrate. So I am a super strong proponent. Obviously, I say it every day, get out there and have some fun. I'm a super strong proponent of people interacting with nature and of educating people so they can do it in a way that preserves nature. But there's a baseline philosophy there, and that philosophy is you're not going to take care of what you don't know and love. And so access to these public lands is uber critical. We've had a few instances in Colorado where there have been some interesting land use challenges, I would say. One is that we have a 14er in Colorado that's privately owned. It was purchased to become some sort of a hunting preserve or something from a foreigner from another nation. And suddenly, one of the 14ers that everyone wanted to climb was no longer available to be climbed. And people get ticketed if they try. They did negotiate an opening, I think, once a year when you can go up with a certain organization to try to summit this 14er. It costs money, and it's all the things, but it was just a wake-up call that for people that love to go out and climb mountains, for people that love to be in nature and have enjoyed the freedom to do so, to have one of those mountains taken away, it's like, what? They can do that? A mountain is too big. And if you compare the mountain to the human lifespan, the mountain might as well be eternal. We're a speck in time in the life of a mountain. And it was like, how could, like the Native Americans used to say, how can a human own the earth? How can you own the land? Right? But we do, and I understand property ownership, and I'm not against it. But it really struck home when this mountain suddenly was no longer available. So Caleb, you've had some experiences that were kind of wake-up calls like that in your neck of the woods in Oregon, too. Let's touch on some of those.
Yeah. I want to backtrack briefly to something that you mentioned, and it actually will, for those that didn't listen to the previous episode I was on, the discussion that we had about finding your
Yes.
why, and that your why can evolve over time. I tell my guests all the time on the mountain, that, essentially my why is to protect these areas, but not necessarily like to tie yourself up around a tree and stand in front of a bulldozer.
Right.
But it's to bring awareness about these places. And I am a huge advocate that if people can't get to these places, then they won't value
Yes.
them. And so that, I mentioned that I have a young daughter, and that is my why. I grew up pretty fortunate being able to travel around, and like Glacier National Park is one of my very favorite places in the world. For those of you that have not
it's
been
glorious.
there, I highly recommend going
Yeah.
there. If you've never been on the Going to the Sun Road, go there. It is beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But for me, like that place is one of those places, without going deep down into the political sphere, like it's changing. I think most people that go outside can say, whether the time of year that we see rain or snow, that is changing. I just want people to have access to these areas so they can see them, because I'm a true believer that if they can't see them, they won't value them, and they won't want to protect them in the future. And my daughter won't have the opportunity to experience them when she's my age or older. And so that, I wanted to bring that back as far as finding your why, because this is very, very important to me, because it is my why. But it's not as you said, like just that one-sided. I think that humans are a part of nature. I think that we can live with it, and that we can be a part of it, but it's also our responsibility to protect it and use it wisely. In Oregon, to come back to your question, in Oregon, there's a lot of challenges. We have a ton of public land, which is amazing. We have amazing national parks, great state parks. However, right now in Oregon, I've been a part of I discussed on a panel for the Oregon legislators about a bill that was trying to go through, and it goes back to a 2014 issue where there was a pretty tragic accident at a ski area, and someone was severely injured. And I think a good meeting or a good meaning judgment that came out of that, it ended up going to court. And essentially what it was is that liability waivers were found at that, or the way that one was worded was, quote, unconscionable, and it didn't clearly describe the risks. And here we are, 11 years later, dealing with a situation where, quite honestly, there's one last insurance company in the state of Oregon for ski areas, and they have openly said that they don't know whether they will stay beyond this year.
Oh, wow.
So we're facing a very real situation where there could be 27 ski areas across the state that just either don't open or don't open beyond this year. And, you want to talk about access. I know that's not necessarily all public lands, but a lot of the ski areas in the state are on public lands, and they are required to have insurance to operate. What better way to take a generation of skiers out than not letting them ski, and not seeing the value in a ski area or not having access? I know there was one ski area that had a mountain bike area that they dealt with an issue. Again, it was an injury, and that went to court, but they haven't opened mountain biking again since that, just because of the liability side of it. So that subject teeters on the political and access side, but I think that it also highlights we have to do this responsibly, and going outside it's not without risk, but it's also got huge rewards to it. And if we only look at it on that legal side, then we take access away, potentially anyways. So if these ski areas don't open, or this specific bill affected outfitters and guides, rock gyms, all kinds of things, I mean, we could see a huge amount of people that just either A, don't go outside, and then what happens to these amazing public lands that we have? If no one goes to them, do they value them? Do they want to protect them? an example that I use when I'm guiding on Shasta, for instance, because it's a pretty amazing mountain just for water and everything else, and it's like a great peak. But I use it on Rainier as well. If they were to find a fortune of gold inside of that mountain, do you think that someone would want to tear down that mountain to get to it? And who would protect the mountain for it? If no one goes there to experience it and to see value in it, who's going to be there to protect it?
Right.
And so my fear right now in Oregon is, who's going to be there to protect these lands if there's minerals on them, if there are things that are of value beyond just the recreational side, and if people aren't going to them, or worse yet, if people do go out there and don't have the experience or the education or the knowledge on how to manage those lands or travel through those lands responsibly, do they unintentionally start to suffer? Do we see a huge influx in search and rescue missions because people are being injured, and there's people out there that just aren't aware of the risks or how to deal with certain risks, or if they get injured, are they capable of getting themselves out? That goes down that deep rabbit hole, but I think it's also part of the responsibility of having public lands and having this amazing access that we do and protecting it, and doing that responsibly. So I know that was a bit of a long ramble and a tangent thrown in a few ways, but I think it goes to show some of the complexity about the access and some of the challenges that we currently have for it as well.
Caleb, you're talking about the complexities and that we want to both take care of it and keep it accessible, right? We want to protect it without barring people from enjoying the wonderful benefits of it. I want to illustrate this with a short visit into psychology. And the reason is because I think it might hit home for some people, okay? A defense mechanism is when you lie to yourself or make up some sort of a story to protect yourself from a perceived emotional threat or physical threat or whatever it is. We have all sorts of defense mechanisms, and I'm not a psychologist, but I have studied this. One obvious defense mechanism that most people use, and I use a lot, is we repress or suppress emotion when it's just too much to handle. We stuff it, and then it comes out later, right? That's a defense mechanism. That's kind of what I'm talking about. But there's one called splitting. And what's fascinating about splitting is that it is a developmental phase that all humans go through as children. But as adults, when we lean into it, it's a defense mechanism that's very unhealthy. And splitting is when you encounter a situation, a person, a concept, and in your mind, it's either all good or all bad. And the defense mechanism is, if someone hurts me, they were my best friend, but now they're all bad. They're a horrible, ugly, terrible person because they hurt me once and they're all bad. I mean, we've all seen the kids on the elementary school playground go through this, right? The problem is when we carry that into adulthood and we live in a world that's binary, everything is either all good or all bad, then we start making some very bad decisions. And I have seen this in conversations regarding caring for the environment and conservation. It is a very complex issue. It's not all good or all bad. It's a mixture of how can we do what we do better? How can we improve on what we're doing? Not a matter of people should be kept out or all mining is bad or all industry is bad. It's more a matter of we're going to have to be responsible adults, roll up our sleeves, and get into the nitty-gritty to figure out the best approach, best practices that serve, all the various concerns and interests in a way that cares for nature and humanity. And that's not easy to do, right? So the reason I bring up splitting is because it's very easy to flippantly just categorize somebody or some organization or some industry or some perspective as all bad, but that doesn't help us usually. And it's so much more valuable, I think, to engage in the conversation and to learn and to grow and to share perspectives so that people can come up with best practices that can lead to the next step of even better practices, right? And so that's for what that's worth. People don't have to agree with me on that, but that is my perspective. So in this situation in Oregon, I can't imagine what the impact would be if all the ski resorts suddenly were like, oh, we're gone. That's it.
Yeah, it is a really, really big deal that's been coming down for a long time. There's been a number of efforts to get Oregon in line. And in this bill that went through, if anyone wants to look it up, the most recent one was House Bill 3140. In a nutshell, what it was going to do was it was going to align Oregon with Idaho, Washington, and California for their liability releases and being able to do that and how they were enforceable. You know, I think without some sort of reform, and I'm not looking, and nor were the people that actually were trying to advance this bill, they weren't looking for all liability to be released. I mean, if I don't do my due diligence as a guide, you know, if I take a break in a known rockfall area and we get hit by a rock, could I have known that there was going to be a rock at that point in time? No. But, you know, if I like have you sit down as a rock is falling towards
Right.
there, that's very different, right? Like I shouldn't be released from that. Like if I put you in a position of harm purposefully. And there's a lot more to it, but I think, you know, if I slip and I fall as I'm skiing on snow, you know, that's part of it, right? If I was in an area that was, and I don't want to say the word safe, like deemed manageable by ski patrol, there were still risks there, right? It's acceptable that I'm on a slope with snow. It's going to be slippery. Otherwise, I wouldn't be skiing, right? There might be ice. There might be variable snow conditions. That is not the responsibility of the ski resort to make sure that every inch of every run is perfect. It is my responsibility as a user to make sure that I am keeping myself within control. Right now in Oregon, that line is very, very blurry, and it scares a lot of ski areas. In the past, the big concern was that insurance costs were going up for them, which, you know, most of the ski areas in the state of Oregon aren't really huge. I can tell you that the one that's about 45 minutes away from me, it's pretty small, and it's community owned. So it's not like we're dealing with huge companies, but when, you know, just this local ski area that I've kind of worked with in the past, I want to say that their insurance, I think the last numbers I saw had gone up 129% in the last few years. Well, you know, what about lift ticket prices for people? You know, at what point does that then also come into access? Like, oh, the ski areas can be open, but our tickets are $700 for a day. Now we're reducing access for certain people as well. I can't afford that sort of price for a lift ticket. So it's difficult, and I think that someone a lot smarter than me, I hope, is at the helm of that and trying to figure that out, because I don't have the answer. But what I do know is that if ski areas close, if people can't go outside, I think as a civilization, communities will suffer, towns will suffer, states will suffer, but people will as well. I mean, if we're not using those areas, what value is there in keeping them? And that's my long-term fear.
You know, just in way of having a conversation about this, there are some mountains in the Sangre de Cristos, some 14ers they're dangerous. They're not the hike up. You know, they are the climb through the rockfall area, and the weather and people climbers above you and the amount of exposure involved. I mean, these are the real deal. And people get hurt. People get hurt up there frequently. In any given summer, there's going to be search and rescue up there. So some people in the local community have said, let's close the mountains because people are getting hurt. And I say, whoa, wait a minute. People are taking a known risk, and it's their job to be safe. And it is a risky place to climb, and you really need to be able to be self-reliant and understand the risk and manage it as well as you can. right, with proper safety gear and wise choices and techniques and all that sort of thing. But do we want to close the 14ers so no one gets hurt? It's kind of like saying, well, people get struck by lightning on these 14ers. Maybe we should ban 14er climbing because lightning storms are a danger. I mean, at what point do we say, wait a minute, it's an individual's responsibility to interact with nature who has always been dangerous? You know, there's no way to get around it. When you're interacting with nature, it can be a warm hug or an amazing threat, right? But that's part of why we do adventure, is to experience the joy, the thrill, the challenge, the wisdom growing, the knowledge growing, the abilities, the talents, the skills, all the things that come from interacting in an environment where there are unknowns, where there are going to be things that happen that we can't predict. And so, obviously, my philosophy on life is to be safe and have fun. Go experience it and grow. Don't close it. Don't stop doing it, because it's just the benefits outweigh the risks. It's too valuable.
It is. Yeah. I think, for listeners, I'll play the other side of that as well. And just to show that you and I we're coming from the same place, and that we don't think that either side to the extreme is good. There's somewhere in the middle. For that example where they were going to just close the 14er because people were getting hurt, well, you could advocate that you should allow every guide company that there is to go out there and take as many people as possible guided.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's the answer either.
No.
Right? Because then you end up with a ton of people out there, and for better or worse, maybe people are traveling in a more managed way, but if you're increasing the number of people there tenfold, that's not good either. So I think protecting those areas is good, but not restricting those areas. And so that's a really cautious and kind of a careful line, to where do we just, if there's risk, do we just close it down? Well, no. We could argue that for the roads. There's traffic accidents, so we might as well just stop people from being able to drive, no vehicles on the road. That's not a realistic thing either. But do we just put 30 lanes on the highway because there's more traffic accidents on this one lane in this road? Well, that's not great either, because now you've just increased a ton of people on that road potentially. I think that the key is looking at it, and again, I think there's someone way smarter than me. I hope they're listening to this and that they spearhead this, trying to figure out, well, these areas are really, really special and crucial to a number of people for a number of reasons. Right. There are risks in that, but those risks don't outweigh the value that people get as a civilization or a society for having access to those. So I think, maybe this is something only someone that's, sat on top of a mountain can really understand, but there's something really special about whether it's on a mountain or on a river, where you're part of the natural environment. You're not outside of it, viewing it from your house, but you're in it. You can smell it, you can feel the wind, you can hear the noises. It's something really, really special, and that's something that people, I don't think, will understand unless they experience it. And not everyone ever will be able to, but they should all have the access to be able to do that. And if they don't, it's just really concerning for the future. And what does that mean? Because it's, in my experience from what I've seen, is, okay, well, once this little bit goes away, it doesn't ever come back. Yeah. And that's a very fine line. And that's not to say that nothing should ever be restricted or protected, but I certainly think that both sides need to have a voice in that. Kind of back to my why, which will segue straight into this. I tell people not to chain themselves up in front of a tree, but most people in my life, most people that I've met or spoken with or climbed with, there's somewhere special to them in the planet. And those places that are special are generally outdoors. That might be a park, down the street from where they grew up. That might be a field, that might be a mountain, or whatever. My advice to them is pay attention to what's happening to that. And, that park down the street is going to be paved over to make it a parking lot. And you agree with that, okay. But if you don't, say something, because that place doesn't have its own voice. And if somebody doesn't say something, it's less likely that anyone else will. But the more people that speak up about it, the more empowered we make that area, or the more relevant we make that area. And so that would be my advice to people is, if it's a 14er that's privatized and people are getting cited and you don't agree with that, don't chain yourself up somewhere and try to obstruct in any way, but go to meetings, talk to people about that, make it a subject so that more people have the right and the power to talk about it. And maybe we don't protect every place, and I don't suspect that we will, but maybe we protect a few really important places. I think that's the long-term, solution, is just talking about it and having those conversations rather than one voice on one side only. I think that open dialect is crucial in looking at it from both sides.
Yeah, I agree. And, if people don't go out and experience it, they don't even know. Here's a very small example. Not a big deal, but it stood out in my mind. One fall, I went on a motorcycle ride in the BLM land, and it was in an area where there are quite a few BLM roads, and it's a lovely place to ride. And then the next spring, late spring, when the roads opened back up again, I went to the same place, and the road was closed permanently. Sign across it, no road. There are other roads, and I thought, okay, this is not necessarily out of balance. They probably had some really good reason for closing this road, although I don't know what it might be, right? But I was shocked. I was like, that was a really good ride. It's gone. And that road is going to continue to sit there in nature for thousands of years because we have an environment that's slow to rebound from that type of soil compression and that sort of thing. And I was like, well, I'm not sure we need to open new roads, but I get a little concerned when existing roads go away because that's part of our access.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing the people that are trying to manage the land, the resources. They have a very important job to do. I'm not criticizing their decisions at this point. I'm just saying that personally, I was impacted. Why? Because I used it, because I was out there, because I was a part of it. It was a part of what I enjoyed. And so had I never ridden there, I would never know that a road was closed, that access was lost, and that, some of the beautiful views and experiences that were down that road were no longer available. I'm not saying it was a good thing or a bad thing to close the road, but if you're out in nature and you're impacted by these things, then you care. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. We care, right? Yeah. And I think that's really what we're kind of talking about, is that these things do matter,
They do, yeah, hugely. That, as you say, that road, for all we know, there could have been a very rare species of flower that was the last place on the planet
I don't know
that it was growing. Absolutely, protect it. I don't want to be the person responsible for killing off the species, right? But you have to know that road, or you have to know those areas to think, oh, yeah, that's important. Okay, I agree with that. People listening, I don't know what road you're talking about. People listening don't either, but I guarantee if you said the road number, people would be like, yeah, okay. But maybe there's a handful of people that have been on that road,
right,
and that spent time there as a kid or have a lot of family memories there. It's important to them, because now they can't get there. I think that's what we're talking about, is experience it, and then that creates the value.
Yeah, certainly it does. There's the economic side to this, which you alluded to a little bit. But I think that we need to bring it into the conversation because it's very real. The national lands, the National Forest Charter was not set up originally to protect the lands from the humans. The charter was set up to manage the resources for the humans. And it's kind of interesting when you look at it historically, and I'm no expert on it, But there is an economic value to public lands beyond just recreation, and that's where it gets really dicey. This is the conversation no one wants to have, right? This is painful stuff, but there are also economic impacts when access is lost. You mentioned, Caleb, the city of Mount Shasta.
Yeah. Mount Shasta, just to paint the picture for people that haven't been there, it's a perfectly quirky mountain town that has amazing personality, great food. The people there are fantastic. People don't generally move there because big business and industry is thriving. They move there because it sits at the base of a 14,000-foot volcano. There's tons of mountain lakes. There's amazing mountain biking. There's a ski area right there. It is an outdoorsman's dream. It is a really, really special place. I want to like, before I really describe the problem there, I want to be very clear that I'm not blaming. I'm not trying to go against officials that are in charge in any way on this. I'm coming from a place of concern for this town and really wanting the best for the area. I want people to have a good life, and I want people to have access to those areas that brought them there originally. So a little bit of the struggle, this started for me where I really started to pay attention to it about 5 years ago when some changes had come in place with just how they were managing roads in the area. It was a great, amazing storm cycle. Tons of powder up on the mountain. Like, backcountry touring was fantastic. The ski area was just rocking. It was doing great. There's a couple of really good restaurants in town. There is one that I frequent in the wintertime just because it's like they always have seating up front and it's great. The people there are fantastic. And I walked in on a Friday night and I had 5 servers to myself, and I was the only person in that restaurant at 6 o'clock. Yeah, and we're talking about just an amazing storm cycle. That town should have been thriving. In the conversation that I had with those people, it was heartbreaking. You know, they had directly seen and connected the dots at when what's known as the Everett Memorial Highway, which goes up to the Bunny Flat Trailhead. It's the only plowed road on the mountain itself, runs up to about 7,000 feet out of town. It is how you will access the mountain in the wintertime and really tour, unless you have a snowmobile and are able to snowmobile up the road or up the trails to get there, and then you can skin in from there. They had directly connected the dots that when that road was closed, that their business plummeted. And I started to ask around, started to check in at hotels. Hotels were empty. The ski area was doing well, but they're just south of town. They're actually closer to another little town. But they were doing well. But the people that would come to the area to tour, which would go up on the mountain, were also the ones that were buying gas, buying groceries, spending money at restaurants, maybe at hotels, going to bars, you know, really spending a fortune in town. And economically, those people are a pretty substantial driver of that town's economy. In the last few years, what's happened is, for various reasons, again, not going political, but it's just a problem that, you know, we're trying to work through. And you know, I've been a part of kind of connecting with a nonprofit that's doing a fantastic job, and we're just trying to come up with solutions, is how do we keep this road open in the winter? Because what they've been doing in the past is anytime a storm is coming through, they just close the gate. And then what happens is that's one of the few kind of like mountain roads, if you will. It doesn't go anywhere other than a parking lot. So it doesn't connect towns. There's nothing on the other side, essentially. It's just to a parking lot. So obviously people in town, their roads are more important. But when you have a road like that that is closed for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then for those people that know, you know, snow settles and it doesn't get softer when it settles, and then they blow up blowers or they can't plow it, and you lose a majority of your ski season where that town is making most of its money. You know, summer and winter, that's where that town makes its money, and that's where businesses do well. When you cut half of that off, things start closing people have a harder time. And then, again, going back to that access, who is going to go there if they can't get to the mountain? So it just is like this ripple effect. And the long-term solution, I think, is getting that road open, but that sounds super simple. I know there's a lot of moving pieces. I know that there is a lot of other drivers to that as far as, what it takes to open that road. And I want to be super clear, this is not in any way bad towards the people working, driving the plow or the blower. Those guys are amazing. They will work their butts off and they're happy to do it. I think that there's challenges that I'm not aware of at this point that are going into that, but it is a problem that I think this community is really struggling with right now. And, hopefully this winter will do well, but yeah, if you look back at like even the 60s when they were having tons more snow, the road was open. I don't know what exactly the reasoning is. I think there's a lot of challenges financially or everything else that go into that. But if it's not a priority, then it's not going to get done. And what happens long term to access there, and then suddenly is it even that important to have that road open 10 years from now? That's a fear. But if you're going through, or if you live in the county, please be a part of what we're trying to do to help that road stay open so that the economy there can do really well, because it's the lifeblood of that community.
Caleb, I want to share a story that's kind of the opposite of that one, but it illustrates a point. If people are aware of what's going on, and you do have a voice in the United States, you can go to meetings, you can say the things, you can talk to people, you can vote, you can talk to your representatives. So Colorado passed a law a couple decades ago, allowing old mountain towns to do gambling. And the reason was, they said it was in alignment with the history of these old mining towns in the mountains in Colorado. And so a gambling industry was born overnight. So there are two tiny towns, that were near Denver, so a big population center, right? And they were Central City and Blackhawk. And Blackhawk is where you enter a side canyon to drive up to Central City. And the two towns overlap to the point that you can't tell where one begins and one ends. But the problem was that the casinos in Blackhawk were getting more traffic than the casinos in Central City because they had the entrance. Mm-hmm. And this was so bewildering to me. People that knew people and had a voice and used it got a road approved from I-70 over this crazy high mountain drive to drop into Central City directly, instead of having to go through Blackhawk, which was literally touching Central City. I mean, they're at the same location. Okay, so this was a 4-lane road built from I-70 to Central City. It's many miles long. It still takes more time to get to Central City if you take the new road than if you go through Blackhawk. It's less convenient. But it created a way that people could land in Central City and gamble there instead of landing in Blackhawk. I don't know how much the road cost. I do know that roads like that are many, 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 many millions of dollars a mile, and this road is probably 20 miles long. And it was all because the political sway of the casinos in Central City. So they built a new road that almost no one uses and wasn't needed, and is the longer way to the destination. I didn't see the point of the road, although I enjoy driving it. I think it's a fun drive. The point I'm trying to make is your voice matters. You can make a difference. If the casino owners in Central City can get probably a $500 million road built, then I do not know how much that road was. But then maybe your voice can make a difference by saying, this road matters to our local economy and we should keep it open, or this area is getting abused and we should educate people on how to care for it. And I mention that on purpose, Caleb, because I know that as a guide, you believe in educating people how to be safe in nature and how to care for nature and interact with nature in a way that is a win-win for everybody. education in my mind is one of the solutions. It's not keep people out, it's teach people how to go in the right way.
Yeah.
How do you value education when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think education is crucial in this. Beyond, like any sort of medical, I mean, I'm an advocate. People that go outside should have some medical training. I will use my medical training whether I'm in the city or out in the outdoors. So, there's that. If people go outside, have some like basic wilderness first aid. You never know. You might use it in a restaurant. That's a value to humanity right there. But education in the outdoors, I mean, my company, we close every year and we pick up trash one day out of the year. And we purposefully do it on part of the busiest time of the season. And the reason for that is because we want to be out there when there's other people there, because we view that as educating them. Because normally if we're picking up trash, someone asks us what we're doing and we explain to them. And it's pretty awesome. I'm a firm believer that people in my profession, it's really, really easy to get upset with people if they drop an orange peel or, throw out an apple core. Most everybody should know it's not okay to drop plastic bags in the outdoor and just leave them there. But it's easy to look at people, and I said on the last episode, words are important to me, and that one of the reasons for that is I truly think that people are ignorant in that way and not like stupid or willingly unaware. I think that they just haven't been taught. If you have somebody that comes from the inner city of Chicago and goes into the wilderness, do they know everything about it? Well, no. But if we can teach them, that also drives that value of, I don't want to drop that orange peel or banana peel because of X, Y, and Z. And, if I see this, I want to then educate somebody else on that too, or make other people aware. And that's part of how we protect these areas. It's making sure that we are educating everybody that we can. As a guide, I'm there for my guests, but I spend moments and I ask people that aren't guided if it looks like they're about ready to do something that they really shouldn't. It's like, hey, do you care if I give you some unsolicited advice or a little bit of input there? And it's just to try and help other people be safe, but also to help manage that area. If we see somebody wandering off trail and traipsing through a meadow of wildflowers, maybe we can stop them. Maybe we can educate them on why they shouldn't do that. It's not my job to be a police officer there and really try and enforce that, but try and help people be aware of the things that they might not be aware of. And then that will help protect those areas in the future. And who knows, that person may pass it on to 20 other people. Your one bit of advice to them or your one little bit of education to them, it could have ripples, and it really could change stuff down the road, and definitely protect areas or keep access to them open. If problems are occurring, and your little piece of advice maybe helps prevent some of those from continuing to occur. Who knows what the changes could be.
We're probably going to have to wrap this up. I want to share one anecdote from one of Tom Brown's books, and there's been a lot of debate over the years whether Tom Brown, how much exaggeration he put into his books, but they're a beautiful read, and if you haven't read any of them, they're amazing about ways to interact with nature. But the anecdote I wanted to share was that he came across a fellow that had driven into the woods, and he was changing the oil in his car and draining it out into the road and the ditch and just leaving the oil there. So instead of yelling at him or trying to get him to stop or being confrontational, he just visited with the guy for a little while, and then he took him slightly down the hill to a pond, and he said, "Have you ever tried fishing here? Do you like to fish?" And the guy started catching fish and was just overjoyed, and then Tom looked at him and said, "Well, you better catch them all, because they're going to be dead soon." And the guy says, "What do you mean? What's going to kill these fish?" And he says, "Well, the oil that you left out on the road up there is going to kill these fish." And so the man ran back to his car and got a shovel and started shoveling the oily dirt into the back of his truck. I mean, it's a way to educate people, not to condemn them, but just it's a way of saying we have a shared resource that we both care about, and this is a better way to care for it. I don't know. Maybe a story will help someone's way of thinking. But how would you do that, Caleb? You have more experience than I do. If you see someone that's doing something that's could leave some harm in the environment, how do you approach them in a way that is positive?
Yeah, I totally agree that coming to somebody aggressively and in a confrontational way does not work.
Yeah.
People get their cackles up pretty quick and they get really defensive, and most people will kind of dig in even if they know they're wrong at that point. I think it's the first thing I do is I try to always put myself in their position, and it kind of goes back to our early part of this discussion and looking at both sides. It's like, why would someone be thinking that this is okay? And that kind of diffuses myself, because typically I'm like, no, don't do that, and I want to really be calm. So it's like, well, why would they think that this is okay? And then come to them in a position of, hey, don't you love this clean air? And it's like a pretty amazing place to be, and I love being out in the wild and like being able to not breathe in a bunch of smog. Yeah, it's great. And just like something like that, and then just remind them, yeah, we're pretty fortunate that fire season's not really bad right now. I sure hope that the cigarette butt that you threw down doesn't change that. And that's even a little bit aggressive, but just like trying to come to it in a way of like find something common ground that you both can value, and like whether it's clean air or snow that you're melting for water, or fish that you're fishing for, and then like casually point out what could change that. And maybe that's what they had done. Maybe it's just something totally different about like, yeah, I hope nothing sparks a fire soon. It's been really bad the last couple of years. And then maybe that plants a seed. It's hard, and you have to read the person. As a guide, when I'm working, it's a little bit different if I'm with guests versus if I'm with people that aren't, essentially paying for that service. With my guests, I can really educate them. With people that aren't with me, they might not want to hear anything I have to say. And that's, sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You just pick it up and you just move on. And if they see you do it, that's kind of enough for them sometimes. Yeah, it's a tricky subject for sure.
Well, lead by example. I love that. That's a really great way to do it.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned something else there, which is sphere of influence. As a guide, you have a sphere of influence with the guests, the people that you're taking on these amazing adventures. And if we try, as across just society as a whole, if we try to change things that are outside of our sphere of influence, I always say it's like Don Quixote tilting at windmills. You're not, you have good intentions, you're not going to accomplish anything here because you don't have the sphere of influence. So if you want to make a difference, think about your sphere of influence, and if you operate inside of it, you're going to have the biggest impact. And that may be training your kids to be, people that care for whatever the value is that you're worried about, right? That might be your sphere of influence. It can also be a letter to the local newspaper. It can also be a blog on the internet. It can be coming on the Adventure Sports Podcast and sharing. The Adventure Sports Podcast has a little bit larger sphere of influence because there's so many wonderful people that listen to this show to be inspired and to celebrate what we all hold is so cool. All these adventure sports and interacting with nature and everything. So that there's a little bit larger sphere of influence. So come on the show. You can write letters to the legislators. You can vote. But you can become a legislator. You can become a teacher. You can get involved in so many different ways and on so many different levels. But I would just say I want to plant the seed. If you operate outside of your sphere of influence, you probably don't understand everything that's going on, and it might just cause more harm than good. So grow your sphere of influence and operate within it, and you'll be very, very effective. And I think that's the way that you can make a difference. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this. This is a different sort of podcast for the Adventure Sports Podcast, but it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And Caleb, will you give us a summary statement, close out the show with something that's near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, this kind of the last few minutes that popped into my head, I think this will summarize it pretty well in this entire show. If everyone's familiar with Dr. Seuss and the Lorax, well, everyone needs Sneeds, right? But what do we do when all the truffula trees are gone? So speak for the trees, and that's, I'm not discouraging people from using the land, and again, just make sure that what's happening with it you agree with. And if you and I are on different sides of that at times, that's okay. But if we're both coming at it from a good point and we're having open discussion, I think that's where we start, not where we end. It's when we close off the discussion on the other side, that's where the problems become.
Wow, very well said. I would love to talk more about this sort of stuff. Listeners, if this touched you in a way, if you realized for the first time, maybe, or you were reminded that, wow, we do have such beautiful resources, take a moment to care. Sort out what your sphere of influence is and decide if it's a value that you want to put energy into or not. Right? You have your own world and your own values and your own important things. But if this is something that matters to you, then care. Pay attention. Talk to other people. And in so doing, I think the world becomes a better place.
No, I'm a guide. I'm not a politician. I didn't get into the outdoors to be political by any means.
Right.
But speak to legislators, as you said. Have a voice. It matters. It really does. You could have a huge impact in what the next 100 years of this country or the planet really looks like by your single voice.
And find your why.
Find your why.
That's awesome, Caleb. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all of this. It's been an enlightening conversation for me. And for all the listeners and viewers out there, thank you for taking the time to listen. And until the next show, get out there and have some fun.
Thanks so much.